When I try to kick him, I just put halfway his feet in my face. And they stop there, I pose. They ask me, how is it? Good.
Sammo Hung had heard all the hype. Bruce Lee, lightning fast, dangerously precise, almost superhuman in a fight. But Sammo wasn't convinced. So, in a quiet moment behind the scenes, he decided to test him with a half-hearted kick just to see how Bruce would react. What happened next would haunt Sammo for the rest of his life. Before he could even blink, Bruce's foot was already hovering in front of his face. Dead still, no impact, just dominance. And in that instant, everything changed. Sammo didn't just meet Bruce Lee that day. He met the edge of his own limits. But their story didn't end there. What began as a challenge turned into a deep respect, a powerful collaboration, and a friendship forever altered by tragedy. Because what Sammo saw behind the legend was something no fan ever did. Before Sammo Hung became one of Hong Kong's most celebrated martial arts legends, he was just a 9-year-old boy thrown into a brutal world of discipline, pain, and impossible expectations, raised not by his parents but by his grandparents. Both deeply entrenched in the local film industry, Sammo's childhood was anything but ordinary. He entered the China Drama Academy, a harsh Peking opera school, where the line between training and punishment often disappeared. There, under the ruthless guidance of Master Yu Jim Yuan, Sammo endured grueling hours of martial arts, acrobatics, and acting drills, often on bare floors with bruised limbs and no time to cry. This was the same school that produced Jackie Chan and other stars of the Seven Little Fortunes troupe. But for Sammo, the path wasn't just difficult, it was traumatic. A devastating leg injury during this time confined him to bed for weeks, and when he returned, everything had changed. He'd gained weight from inactivity, lost the razor-sharp edge of his training, and found himself mocked for his body. But instead of quitting, he adapted. That injury became a turning point. While others might have crumbled, Sammo embraced the pain and molded it into something new. He leaned into his growing size and learned how to move like a fighter twice as light. He took the roles no one else could play: villains, henchmen, comedic relief, and gave them heart, skill, and surprising agility. At just 14, he was already working behind the camera as an assistant to legendary Shaw Brothers action director Han Yingji. This early experience gave him the tools to not only act, but choreograph and direct. When audiences laughed at his size, Sammo responded by flying across screens with a grace they didn't see coming. His first breakthrough moment came in 1973 when he appeared in Enter the Dragon, playing opposite Bruce Lee in the film's explosive opening. It wasn't just another fight scene. It was a symbolic passing of the torch. Bruce was the undisputed king of martial arts cinema at the time, but Sammo's powerful performance left a lasting impression. What most people didn't know was that Bruce had handpicked Sammo for that role. Behind the camera, there was mutual respect, even admiration. But to understand how profound that respect was, you have to go back even further to the moment Bruce Lee kicked without kicking. That unspoken message changed how Sammo approached martial arts, filmmaking, and even himself. It taught him that mastery wasn't about how hard you hit. It was about control, intent, and presence. That lesson stayed with him through decades of hardship, reinvention, and resilience. As his peers chased fame and big-budget franchises, Sammo quietly built a body of work that pushed boundaries. He blended action with comedy, pain with power, movement with meaning. But in the shadows of his rise was always the memory of Bruce, what he represented, what he taught without words, and what was lost when he died too soon. While Sammo Hung was learning how to survive inside the harsh walls of the China Drama Academy, Bruce Lee was learning how to survive on the streets of Hong Kong. Born in San Francisco in 1940 but raised in Kowloon, Bruce's childhood was a blur of film sets, fists, and frustration. As the son of a Cantonese opera performer and a Eurasian mother, Bruce was always on the edge of belonging. He didn't look fully Chinese, and to many in the local community, that was enough to make him a target. By the time he was a teenager, Bruce had become known not for his film roles, but for his street fights. Bullied for his heritage and fiery temper, he joined a gang and developed a reputation for never backing down. That defiance got him into trouble more than once. One fight went so far, that it ended with police intervention, forcing his mother to make a difficult decision: send him away or risk him being arrested again. At just 18, Bruce was shipped back to the United States with a one-way ticket and a warning: sink or swim. He landed in San Francisco with almost nothing, then moved to Seattle, where he waited tables to survive. But Bruce wasn't interested in staying small. Even while attending university, he began teaching martial arts out of his garage, gradually attracting curious students with his speed, intensity, and total rejection of tradition. Unlike other martial artists of the time, Bruce refused to stick to one form. He combined Wing Chun with fencing, boxing, and raw street technique, creating a style that was aggressive, fluid, and unorthodox. That approach would eventually become Jeet Kune Do, a martial art philosophy built on the idea that fighting should be adaptable, real, and without limitations. To Bruce, martial arts wasn't about memorizing forms or respecting old masters. It was about truth, expression, and freedom. But this revolutionary mindset made him a threat to the martial arts establishment, especially when he began teaching non-Chinese students, something that was considered taboo at the time. Rumors spread. Challenges were issued, and Bruce responded the only way he knew how: by fighting. One of the most infamous moments came in 1964, during the Long Beach International Karate Championships. In front of a stunned crowd, Bruce showcased his now iconic one-inch punch and lightning-fast kicks, demonstrating power that seemed almost supernatural. It was here that he caught the attention of Hollywood. He started training big-name actors like Steve McQueen and James Coburn, and for a moment, it looked like Bruce was about to become the first true Asian superstar in American film. But the system wasn't ready for him. When he pitched a show called The Warrior, centered on a Chinese martial artist in the American West, it was rejected. The lead role was handed to David Carradine, a white actor who had no martial arts background. Bruce had been sidelined in his own creation. That betrayal lit a fire in him. He returned to Hong Kong and took matters into his own hands, launching a new career with full creative control. In the years that followed, Bruce wrote, directed, choreographed, and starred in a string of martial arts films that changed cinema forever. The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, Way of the Dragon, and Enter the Dragon weren't just action movies. They were statements. Bruce didn't just fight on screen. He fought systems. He tore down stereotypes. He showed the world what an Asian man could be: fierce, articulate, philosophical, and powerful. But behind the camera, he was pushing himself to the edge. Between 18-hour workdays, obsessive training, and constant pressure to prove himself, Bruce was running at a pace no human could sustain. And even as his star rose, there were signs that something was wrong. He complained of headaches, seizures, exhaustion. His body was sounding alarms. But Bruce was too determined to slow down. Just as he was reaching the height of his fame, Bruce would face a devastating turn, and it would come just after filming his most iconic battle with none other than Sammo Hung. When the cameras rolled on Enter the Dragon in 1973, few realized they were witnessing the last completed film Bruce Lee would ever make. The opening fight scene, set in a tranquil Shaolin courtyard, was short, precise, and unforgettable. But to martial arts insiders, that scene meant more than a stylish introduction. It was a symbolic passing of energy between two legends. On one side stood Bruce Lee, now a global icon. On the other, Sammo Hung, still carving out his legacy. For just a few seconds, the world watched these two titans collide. But what most viewers never saw was the respect and tension simmering just beneath the surface. Behind the cameras, Bruce had personally asked for Sammo to appear in the film. He wanted someone who could match his intensity, someone who understood not just the technicality of the moves, but the rhythm, the discipline, and the deeper language of fighting on screen. Sammo, still considered a rising talent in Hong Kong, saw this as more than an opportunity. It was a test, and a chance to repay the respect Bruce had shown him years earlier when he delivered that infamous kick just inches from Sammo's face. What happened on set left a deep mark on Sammo. He later described how Bruce's focus was nearly inhuman. He didn't waste words. He didn't break concentration. Even while joking around between takes, Bruce would snap back into character with terrifying precision. Sammo, who had already trained in hundreds of fight scenes, admitted that Bruce made him feel like a student again. The way Bruce choreographed each motion, fluid yet forceful, elegant yet deadly, changed the way Sammo approached action cinema forever. But there was also an emotional undercurrent that few understood. Sammo had watched Bruce rise from the chaos of Hong Kong street fights to the glamour of Hollywood premieres. He knew how much Bruce had sacrificed, how the rejection, the racism, the endless obstacles had forced Bruce to build his own stage rather than wait for someone to offer him one. And now, here they were, facing each other as opponents on camera, but allies in spirit. After filming wrapped, Sammo expected there would be more collaborations, more stories, maybe even a friendship that would last through the decades. But Bruce had other plans. He was already deep into developing Game of Death, a film that would fully reflect his philosophy of martial arts. And he was talking about going back to Hollywood again, this time with full control, bigger budgets, and fewer compromises. For Sammo, the thought was electrifying. Bruce was opening doors for everyone, rewriting what martial arts cinema could be, and lifting other Asian talents along the way. But then, just weeks before the release of Enter the Dragon, the unthinkable happened. Bruce Lee, strong, invincible, unshakable Bruce Lee, collapsed and died at just 32 years old. The world stopped. Sammo, like millions of others, was left stunned. He had fought him on screen, laughed with him off screen, and now, without warning, he was gone. In the years that followed, Sammo would speak of Bruce not just as a colleague, but as a visionary, someone who lived faster and burned brighter than anyone he had ever met. That single fight scene in Enter the Dragon became more than just a memory. It became a symbol of everything Sammo stood for: respect, mastery, and the bittersweet weight of what could have been. And while Bruce was gone, the lessons he passed on, both through his art and his silence, would shape every move Sammo made from that moment on. But Sammo's own path was about to take a turn for the worse, as fame began to fade and new battles emerged, not in the ring, but in life itself. Bruce Lee's death didn't just shake the world. It left a gaping hole in martial arts cinema. And for Sammo Hung, that absence hit differently. Bruce had been a beacon, not just for what was possible in film, but for what it meant to be Asian, proud, and powerful on a global stage. With Bruce gone, Sammo quietly stepped into a world now struggling to carry the torch. At first, it seemed like Sammo was ready. He directed Iron-Fisted Monk in 1977, blending raw action with unexpected storytelling. Audiences responded. He wasn't Bruce, but he wasn't trying to be. He had his own voice, gritty, clever, and deeply human. In the years that followed, Sammo carved out a niche with films like The Prodigal Son and Encounters of the Spooky Kind. He brought humor to martial arts without sacrificing skill. He proved that you didn't need to look like a chiseled warrior to command the screen. You just needed heart, rhythm, and truth. Alongside Jackie Chan and Yuen Biao, he built an era. Their trio became legendary, blending slapstick, stunts, and cinematic magic. But behind the scenes, the weight of leadership was starting to crack Sammo's foundation. The 1980s brought success, but the late 80s and early 90s brought something far worse: decline. Jackie Chan's fame had gone international, overshadowing everyone in his orbit, including Sammo. What used to be a partnership now felt like a comparison, one that Sammo was constantly losing. He kept working, kept directing, but the hits weren't landing the same. Films like Pantyhose Hero and Slickers vs. Killers flopped, and then the financial collapse came. Sammo had built his own production company, Boho Films, with the dream of telling stories his way. But dreams don't protect you from reality. By 1991, after a series of box office failures and shrinking investor confidence, even Golden Harvest, one of Hong Kong's most powerful studios, cut ties with him. That partnership had once launched his career. Now, it abandoned him when he needed it most. Sammo was left with debt, disappointment, and a haunting question. Had the world moved on without him? Professionally, he started fading into the background, taking more backstage roles, doing fight choreography, helping younger talent shine. Personally, things were worse. His first marriage, which had survived over 2 decades and brought him 4 children, crumbled in 1994. The timing wasn't lost on anyone. His divorce came just as his public influence was collapsing and the emotional toll was evident. Sammo had been the rock, the provider, the creative force. But now, the cracks were showing. He later admitted in interviews that he regretted not spending enough time with his children during their early years. He was always on set, always in production, always working to stay relevant in an industry that worshipped speed and youth. His absence created distance and sometimes resentment. Even as some of his children followed him into entertainment, the roles became complicated. Was he their father, their mentor, or just a fading icon they couldn't quite reach? By the mid-90s, Sammo was nearly invisible on the global stage. His influence remained in the DNA of action cinema, but his name wasn't trending anymore. Not in Hong Kong, not in Hollywood. For a man who once stood across from Bruce Lee in one of the most iconic fight scenes of all time, the fall was quiet and cruel. But just when it seemed like the story might end in disappointment, fate had other plans. Because across the ocean, in the most unlikely place imaginable, Sammo Hung was about to rise again. And this time, it wouldn't be in a smoky Hong Kong studio, but on American television screens, in front of millions of new fans who had no idea who he was yet. Just when Sammo Hung seemed to vanish from the spotlight, America came calling. It wasn't a film studio or a major director. It was television. In 1998, CBS launched Martial Law, a crime drama with a twist. The lead character wasn't a clean-cut American cop or a slick detective. He was a heavy-set, middle-aged Chinese martial artist who barely spoke fluent English. In other words, he was Sammo Hung. And against all odds, it worked. For the first time in his life, Sammo wasn't just choreographing behind the scenes or playing second fiddle to Jackie Chan. He was the face on billboards across Los Angeles. He was the one audiences tuned in to see every Saturday night. Martial Law was a breath of fresh air, fast, funny, and full of the signature action choreography Sammo had perfected over decades. The show didn't try to hide who he was. In fact, it leaned into it. His size became an asset, his age a point of pride, and his fists still flew faster than men half his weight. American viewers were hooked. They had never seen anyone like him. A martial artist who could crush bad guys with grace and humor, but also show quiet vulnerability in moments of personal reflection. The show was a success, running for 2 seasons and turning Sammo into an unexpected primetime star in the West. But even success has a cost. Behind the scenes, Sammo wasn't always happy. The writing, he felt, was often stiff, and the cultural gap between him and the American production team became frustrating. He wanted depth, complexity, philosophy. They wanted explosions and one-liners. While millions loved watching him chase down criminals, Sammo couldn't shake the feeling that the soul of his art was being lost in translation. He'd worked too hard, survived too much, to reduce his legacy to shallow storytelling. After 2 seasons, he walked away. Not with anger, but with a sense of closure. He had proven to the world, and perhaps to himself, that he could still lead, still matter, still fight. And yet, even with that victory, the years of wear and tear were catching up. His body, once his greatest weapon, had become a source of struggle. He was aging, and his lifestyle wasn't helping. Years of relentless filming, poor diet, and lack of rest had taken their toll. In 2010, the consequences became terrifyingly real. Sammo suffered a serious heart issue that required emergency surgery. It was a moment of reckoning. The man who once flew through the air in wire stunts and outfought Bruce Lee on screen was now lying in a hospital bed, his life hanging in the balance. For weeks, his fans held their breath. When he emerged from surgery, alive but shaken, Sammo knew things had to change. He later confessed that the experience forced him to reevaluate everything: his health, his family, even his legacy. It wasn't just about recovery, it was about redemption. He began paying more attention to his body, spending more time with his wife, Joyce Godenzi, his co-star from Eastern Condors and a constant source of support, and trying to rebuild relationships with his children. Sammo had always been a warrior on screen, but now he was learning how to fight in real life, for connection, for peace, and for meaning beyond the applause. And just when many assumed his career was winding down, Sammo made a bold return, not just to the camera, but to the director's chair. In 2016, nearly 2 decades after his last directorial effort, he released The Bodyguard, a film about aging, regret, and silent strength. It wasn't flashy or filled with high-flying kicks. It was quieter, more intimate, almost poetic. And in many ways, it was a reflection of where Sammo was in life, a man no longer trying to prove anything, just trying to tell the truth. But Sammo's story was never just his own. It was forever tied to the shadow of Bruce Lee, his old friend, his on-screen opponent, and his eternal inspiration. And now, decades later, as Sammo looked back at everything he'd survived, it became clear Bruce's influence hadn't ended with a single kick. It had shaped the way Sammo lived, loved, and continued to fight. July 20th, 1973. It was supposed to be just another busy day in Bruce Lee's relentless schedule. Meetings, rehearsals, preparations for Game of Death. Instead, it became the day the world stood still. At only 32 years old, Bruce collapsed after taking a simple painkiller for a headache. The official cause: cerebral edema, swelling in the brain, likely triggered by an allergic reaction. But to this day, rumors swirl. Was it exhaustion? A reaction to medication? A deeper, darker conspiracy? No one truly knows. All that mattered was that Bruce Lee, the man who had redefined power, precision, and presence, was gone. For Sammo Hung, the news didn't feel real at first. It wasn't just shock, it was grief, layered with disbelief. How could someone so alive, so vital, so unstoppable, suddenly be nothing but a memory? They had just worked together. Sammo had felt Bruce's energy, seen his intensity up close, witnessed his mind sharpen every moment of every scene, and now that spark was gone, forever. But the pain wasn't just personal, it was cultural. Bruce had opened a door no one else could. He wasn't just a martial artist. He was a global icon, a symbol of Asian strength at a time when Hollywood still forced Asian actors into stereotypes. He was rewriting history, and Sammo knew it. Without Bruce, it felt like the movement they were building had lost its soul. There were plans, unfinished films, promised collaborations, unspoken dreams. Sammo never got to have the deeper creative partnership with Bruce that he had hoped for. He had imagined future projects, perhaps even co-directing, merging Bruce's philosophical fire with his own visual mastery. But death doesn't wait for dreams to be completed. And what made it worse was knowing how much Bruce had carried, physically, emotionally, spiritually. The intensity that made him great might have also been what burned him out. In the wake of Bruce's passing, the industry scrambled to fill the void. Studios rushed to release leftover footage. Lookalikes were cast. Imitation films were churned out with titles like Bruce's Fist Strikes Again and Enter the Game of Death. And while these cheap copies kept theaters full, they diluted what Bruce had truly stood for. Sammo watched this unfold with a mix of sorrow and anger. Bruce hadn't just been a product. He was a movement. He deserved better than exploitation. Still, Sammo didn't speak publicly about his grief, not right away. For years, he carried it quietly, letting it bleed into his work. His fight scenes grew more layered, his characters more thoughtful. You could see the influence: Bruce's discipline, his economy of movement, his emotional intensity, reflected in the way Sammo told stories. He wasn't trying to be Bruce, but he was honoring him in every kick, every frame, every decision, to go deeper when others chose spectacle. Decades later, Sammo would finally speak openly about what Bruce meant to him, not as a colleague, but as a friend, a fire starter, a mirror. He was very fast, Sammo once said, recalling the moment Bruce's kick stopped just inches from his face. So fast, I didn't even see it coming. And in many ways, that moment was a metaphor for everything Bruce had done, not just in martial arts, but in life. He moved faster than the world could process. And by the time they understood what he was doing, he was already gone. But Sammo didn't let the story end there. As the years passed, he made it his mission to protect what Bruce had built, not just through films, but through teaching, mentoring, and insisting on authenticity in martial arts cinema. He didn't want Bruce to be remembered as just an icon. He wanted the world to remember the man behind the legend, the one who pushed others to be better, who demanded more from the screen, who changed what it meant to fight. And perhaps more than anything, Sammo understood the loneliness that came with that kind of greatness, because he, too, had felt it. And he knew that carrying someone else's legacy is often heavier than carrying your own. Sammo Hung didn't retire. He evolved. After surviving the chaos of fame, failure, and even a life-threatening heart scare, he returned, not as the hungry young stuntman chasing screen time, but as a quiet master shaping the next generation of martial arts storytelling. In 2008, audiences witnessed his rebirth. While he wasn't the face of IP Man, his work behind the camera transformed the film into an instant classic. The fight choreography, precise, brutal, poetic, carried Sammo's unmistakable fingerprint. Every movement was measured. Every blow had meaning. And in those scenes, Bruce Lee's ghost wasn't just present, it was honored. The irony was poetic. The IP Man series told the story of Bruce Lee's own teacher, Master Yip Man. And here was Sammo, a man who had once fought Bruce on screen, now shaping the narrative that helped explain where Bruce came from. It was a full circle moment. A salute to history, and a declaration that even decades later, the spirit of martial arts wasn't just alive, it was evolving. Sammo would later take a starring role in IP Man 2, stepping into the spotlight once again. Older, heavier, but no less commanding. He moved like someone with nothing left to prove, only stories left to tell. Then in 2016, he directed The Bodyguard. It wasn't what fans expected. No flashy stunts, no over-the-top villains, just a quiet, broken man trying to protect someone who mattered. It was tender, it was slow, it was personal, and maybe that's why it hit so hard. Beneath the stillness was a man reflecting on everything he'd lost: time, health, relationships, and everything he'd fought to protect: dignity, honor, meaning. It wasn't just a film, it was a confession. A man once praised for his physical strength, now revealing the strength it takes to keep going when your body fails, when your era fades, when your heroes die. But Sammo's greatest contribution in recent years hasn't been just his films, it's been his mentorship. He's trained and inspired countless young stunt performers, actors, and filmmakers, many of whom grew up watching him fly across rooftops and crash through tables with Jackie Chan. Through workshops, productions, and private lessons, he's passed down not just technique, but philosophy. He teaches what Bruce once embodied, that martial arts is not just about the fight. It's about the story behind the fight. Why you throw a punch matters as much as how you throw it. And as martial arts cinema continues to evolve, through wirework, CGI, and massive Hollywood budgets, Sammo's quiet influence is still present. You see it in the way action scenes are paced, in how emotion is tied to movement, in the insistence that fight choreography should reflect character, not just spectacle. Bruce Lee might have ignited the global flame, but Sammo helped keep it burning. What's more, Sammo's own children have entered the industry. His son, Sammo Hung, is an actor and martial artist in his own right. But Sammo hasn't forced the legacy on him. Instead, he guides from the shadows, there if needed, but never imposing. Because Sammo understands better than most that every warrior must walk their own path. He did, Bruce did. And now, it's his turn to be the quiet voice in the background, reminding the next generation what the fight is really for. In interviews, when asked about the meaning of legacy, Sammo doesn't speak in grand phrases. He just nods and says, "Do good work, that's all." But for those who know his story, for those who remember the kick that never landed, the scenes that changed cinema, and the wounds that never fully healed, his legacy is already written. Not in gold statues or viral fame, but in moments, in motion. In every young fighter who learns that power without discipline is just noise. And above it all, the spirit of Bruce Lee still lingers, like a shadow, like a spark, not haunting Sammo, but walking beside him, always just out of reach, but never out of mind. In the end, Sammo Hung's journey is not just a story about martial arts. It's a story about survival, transformation, and quiet endurance. Decades after standing across from Bruce Lee in that legendary courtyard scene, Sammo carries more than just the memory of a friend. He carries the weight of a generation that defined what it meant to fight on screen with truth and soul. And in his own way, he's done what Bruce never got the chance to do: grow old, reflect, evolve, and guide others with the wisdom that only comes from living through the fire. Bruce Lee was a lightning strike. Brilliant, blinding, gone too soon. Sammo Hung was the storm that rolled in afterward, steady, loud when he needed to be, but more powerful than most people ever realized. He didn't burn out, he endured. And in doing so, he kept alive the essence of what Bruce started. Not just fists and fury, but discipline, honor, precision, storytelling that came from the gut. You can feel it in the way Sammo speaks about Bruce even now. Never with envy, never with regret, but with reverence. Not just because Bruce was faster or more famous, but because Bruce showed him and the world what it looked like to push past limits without losing yourself. And when that kind of force disappears, it leaves a silence that's hard to fill. Sammo never tried to replace Bruce. He just tried to make sure the silence didn't become forgetfulness. That's why every time Sammo stepped behind the camera or choreographed a fight or took on a role that defied expectations, it wasn't just about entertainment. It was about memory. About proving that martial arts wasn't a trend. It was a language, a way to speak truths no words could hold, a way to carry grief, rage, joy, and pride through motion. In an era where martial arts films have become saturated with CGI and spectacle, Sammo remains a reminder of something purer, something real. He never relied on visual tricks or flashy gimmicks. He used gravity, weight, timing, emotion, and in doing so, he made it clear that the fight scene wasn't just where the action happened, it was where the story reached its heart. Bruce Lee once said, "The key to immortality is first living a life worth remembering." Sammo didn't chase immortality, but he lived a life that will be remembered, not for perfection, but for resilience. He stumbled, he failed, he suffered, but he got up again. And in every frame of film where he flew through the air, or landed a punch, or stood breathless in silence, there's a piece of that story, a piece of that fight. Today, as new generations discover old classics or stumble across clips online, many are seeing Sammo Hung and Bruce Lee for the first time. They watch Enter the Dragon and marvel at the speed. They revisit The Bodyguard and feel the ache of age. They look deeper and realize that this wasn't just choreography. It was life etched into motion. And they ask the same question Sammo once did. How do you honor someone who changed everything? How do you carry on when the person who inspired you is no longer here? Sammo's answer has always been the same. You don't speak loudly. You don't make grand declarations. You just do the work. You show up. You fight well. You tell the truth, even when it hurts. And above all, you never forget who helped you find your strength. Because some legends blaze a trail, others make sure it never fades. Sammo Hung did both. And in doing so, he ensured that Bruce Lee's story didn't end with a sudden death, but kept living through every punch, every film, and every student still trying to find their own way forward. Sammo Hung never set out to become a legend. He was just a boy trying to survive the brutal halls of the China Drama Academy. Just a stuntman trying to earn respect. Just a fighter trying to keep up with a man whose kicks were faster than thought. But over the decades, through every injury, every disappointment, every unexpected comeback, Sammo proved something Bruce Lee had once believed deeply. That the strongest fighters are the ones who never stop evolving. Their paths crossed only briefly, but the impact lasted a lifetime. Bruce taught the world how to fight with purpose. Sammo showed us how to keep going when the lights dim and the crowd moves on. One was a firework, explosive and unforgettable. The other, a flame, steady, enduring, quietly lighting the way for those who came next. Together, they didn't just shape martial arts cinema, they reshaped the way we define strength, honor, and legacy. So the next time you watch Enter the Dragon, look closer at that first fight scene. Look past the kicks and punches. See two warriors sharing a moment of respect, one at the peak of his power, the other just beginning to rise. And know that long after the credits rolled, one of them kept carrying that spirit, not with fame, but with loyalty. Not for applause, but for meaning. If this story moved you, show it some love. Hit that like button so more people can discover legends like Sammo and Bruce. Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how their stories impacted you. And if you want more untold stories of icons who changed the world without needing to shout, don't forget to subscribe. Because their stories didn't end with the final scene. In many ways, they're still being written by all of us.